Single dad was about to be kicked out by a CEO until her son said something unbelievable. The call came at 2:47 p.m. "Miss Era, your son, the school. Please come now." She didn't remember driving there. She only remembered the crowd, teachers, parents, strangers, all parting as she pushed through. And then she saw him, Liam Dietz, sitting on the curb, knees pulled to his chest, a school jacket draped over his shoulders that wasn't his. The PE teacher was still shaking. A construction truck lost control near the east gate. Your son froze in the middle of the road. Someone pulled him out, just in time. Ara dropped to her knees in front of Liam, hands on his face, scanning every inch of him. "Who?" she asked without looking up. "Who pulled him out?" Silence. "We don't know," the teacher said quietly. "He was gone before we could ask his name. Left before the ambulance even arrived." Ara held her son tighter than she had in months, maybe years. That night, she sat in the hospital chair beside Liam's bed, still wearing her blazer, heels still on. On her desk back at the office, there was a file she hadn't signed yet, a clearance order. 42 units. One residential block scheduled for demolition to make way for her next development project. Just numbers. Just progress. She told herself that. But what if the man who saved your child is the same man you're about to make homeless, and you don't even know his name yet? The file was still on her desk when she returned. 42 units. Maple Row Residential Block, Zone 4C. Scheduled for clearance to accommodate Phase 2 of the Northgate commercial development. A project that, when completed, would generate an estimated $340 million in revenue over 5 years, create 12,200 jobs, and cement Era's company as the dominant development firm in the city's northern corridor. She had worked on this deal for 11 months. She had not slept more than 5 hours a night for most of them. She sat down, smoothed her blazer, and picked up her pen. Then she put it down again. Through the glass wall of her office, the city spread out in every direction, cranes and scaffolding, and the skeletal frames of buildings that didn't exist yet. Progress, made visible. That was what she did. She took empty space and filled it with something that lasted. She picked up the pen again. Her phone buzzed. Her assistant, Jen, "Liam is awake. The hospital called. He's asking for you." She set the pen down. Unsigned. He was sitting up in bed eating orange jello when she arrived, the television on low, some cartoon she didn't recognize. He looked small in the hospital gown. He had always looked small to her, not in a worrying way, but in the way that children look small when you love them and fear for them simultaneously. "Hey, buddy." She pulled the chair close, sat on its edge. "How are you feeling?" Liam shrugged. Ate another spoonful of jello. "The doctor says you can probably come home tomorrow morning." She smoothed the blanket over his legs. "I already called Mrs. Park. She'll stay with you while I don't want Mrs. Park." Liam, Dut. "I want you to stay." She looked at him. At his face, his father's jawline, her eyes, a combination that still occasionally surprised her. He was 8 years old, and he had almost died today, and she was calculating how many hours she could afford to be away from the office. She hated herself a little for that. "I'll stay tonight," she said. He looked at her sideways, checking for the asterisk. She'd trained him to look for it. She knew that. "No phone calls after 9, she added. "I promise." He seemed to decide that was acceptable. He offered her a spoonful of jello. She took it, even though she didn't like Jell-O, even though she hadn't eaten anything sweet voluntarily in about 3 years. Mom. Bitte. He was looking at the television now, not at her. The man who helped me today. She stilled. He had a kid too. I saw him. Before, at the gate. He was dropping off a kid. A little girl with pigtails. Liam turned the spoon over in his fingers. He didn't even know me. He just ran. Ara said nothing. I want to say thank you to him. We'll find him, she said quietly. But even as she said it, some part of her was already calculating the odds. A stranger, no name, gone before the ambulance arrived. The city was full of people moving through each other's lives without leaving marks. That was how cities worked. That was how progress worked. She told herself she'd try. She believed that at the time. 3 days later, she was back. The Northgate project team was assembled in the conference room on the 14th floor. Lawyers, architects, her VP of development Marcus, and a representative from the city council who had been very enthusiastic about the tax revenue projections. The Maple Row clearance order was item 3 on the agenda. She dispatched items 1 and 2 in 22 minutes. The residential block, Marcus began, pulling up the site map. We've had some pushback from a few of the current tenants. Most have accepted the buyout packages, fair market plus 15%, which is above standard. But we have a handful who haven't signed yet. He clicked to the next slide. 13 units still outstanding. Mostly long-term residents, some with children enrolled in local schools, so there's a timing sensitivity around the academic calendar. What's the holdout reason? Ara asked. Mixed. A few are waiting to see if they can negotiate higher. 2 families claim they can't find comparable housing in the area at the price point. And 1, Marcus clicked again, has formally requested a meeting. He sent a written notice through the Tenants Association. Daniel Cho, Unit 14, 7 years in residence. Single father, 1 child. He paused. He's asked to speak to someone with decision-making authority. Ara glanced at the file. Photo attached. A man in his mid-30s, dark hair, work jacket. The kind of face you'd pass on the street and not remember. Schedule it, she said. Marcus looked mildly surprised. She usually delegated tenant meetings. I'll take it, she added, in a tone that closed the subject. He arrived on time. That was the first thing she noticed. She had a precise and somewhat involuntary habit of noting punctuality, in contractors, in lawyers, in the people who sat across from her in rooms like this. Tardiness told her something. So did early arrivals, which often signaled anxiety dressed as eagerness. But on time meant a person who had made a decision about what they were worth and arrived accordingly. Daniel Cho arrived at 10:00 a.m. for a 10:00 a.m. meeting. He was taller than his photo suggested. He wore a gray shirt, no tie, clean hands. He carried a folder, paper, not a tablet, and he sat down across from her without the particular kind of nervous arrangement that people often performed in her office. No unnecessary straightening of chairs, no clearing of throats, no preamble about how much he appreciated her taking the time. He just sat down and looked at her. Thank you for meeting with me, he said. Of course. Of course. She folded her hands on the desk. I understand you have concerns about the Maple Row transition. I have questions, he said. Not concerns, there's a difference. She studied him for a moment. All right, what are your questions? He opened the folder. Inside, printed documents, organized with tabs. She noted that too. The buyout offer is for fair market value plus 15%. I've done some research. He turned to the first tab. Fair market value in this area has been suppressed for the last 4 years because of a combination of deferred infrastructure investment and deliberate underdevelopment in the zone, some of which your company has been involved in. So fair market plus 15 is technically accurate, but it's calculated against an artificially low baseline. He looked up. That's my first question. Is the company aware of that? And if so, is there any appetite to recalculate based on pre-suppression values? Ara didn't move. That's a strong claim. I have documentation. He didn't push the folder toward her. Didn't need to. That's not a threat. It's context. I'm not here to sue anyone. I'm here to have a conversation. She looked at him for a long moment. In 11 months of working on this project, no one, not one tenant, not one community representative, not one city council member, had framed the buyout value question in those terms. It was accurate. She knew it was accurate. Her legal team had constructed the offer carefully enough to be defensible, not generous. Your second question, she said. Relocation timeline. He turned to the second tab. The academic year ends in 11 weeks. My daughter is in second grade. I'd like to understand whether there's any flexibility to extend the vacant date to the end of the school year, or whether the demolition schedule is actually that rigid. The construction permits are contingent on a specific ground break date. I know. I read the city filing. He met her eyes. I'm asking whether the date is genuinely fixed, or whether it's fixed because no one has asked otherwise. There was a silence. She had sat across from many people in this office. Investors who wanted to impress her. Lawyers who wanted to outmaneuver her. Employees who wanted to placate her. Occasionally, journalists who wanted to expose her. She had a taxonomy for all of them, a set of responses calibrated to each type. You did not have a calibration for this. Mr. Cho, she said carefully, what outcome are you hoping for from this meeting? He closed the folder. I want to know if you're a person who makes decisions because they're the best decisions available, or because they're the easiest decisions to defend. The room was very quiet. Because those are not the same thing, he continued. Without heat, without performance. I've worked in construction. I know how development projects are structured. I know the math on this deal makes sense for your company. I'm not asking you to lose money. He picked up the folder. I'm asking you to look at 42 families as a problem worth solving, not a line item worth closing. Ara looked at him. Somewhere in the back of her mind, tucked behind the acquisition timeline and the Phase 2 milestones and the quarterly board presentation, a small and inconvenient thought surfaced. He is right about the suppressed valuation. He is right about the school calendar. He is right, and he knew he was right before he walked in this door, and he still came and asked questions instead of filing an injunction. I'll have my team review the timeline, she said. With respect to the valuation question, I'll need to take that to legal. I'm not in a position to commit to anything today. He nodded. He had expected that. Or something like it. I appreciate your time, he said, and stood. She stood too. Reflex, not courtesy. Mr. Cho. Nay. He paused. Why didn't you file through the Housing Advocacy Office? They would have escalated this faster. He considered the question with what seemed like genuine thought. Because I don't want to fight, he said. I want a conversation. Those are different things too. He left. She stood at her window for a long time after, watching the city below. On her desk, the clearance order still sat unsigned. She picked up her pen. She put it down. She told herself she needed more information before she could make a responsible decision. She told herself that a CEO who reacts emotionally to a single tenant meeting is a CEO who loses projects. She told herself all of the reasonable, defensible, accurate things. But for the first time in 11 months, she picked up her phone and called Marcus and said, "Pull the suppressed valuation data for Zone 4C. I want the numbers going back 6 years." It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was the first time in a long time that she had done something because it felt wrong not to, rather than because it was easy to justify. She didn't know the man's name yet. Not really. He was a file number, a unit number, a tab, in a folder. She didn't know that 3 days ago he had dropped his daughter at the east gate of a school, turned to leave, and heard the sound of a truck losing its brakes on the hill. She didn't know that he had run without thinking. She didn't know that the jacket on her son's shoulders, the one that wasn't his, was still folded on the chair in Liam's hospital room, gray, slightly worn at the left cuff, smelling faintly of wood shavings and laundry detergent. She would find out. But not yet. In the taxonomy she had built for people who sat across from her desk, she had no category for a man who was right, knew he was right, and asked questions anyway. She was going to have to build one. Liam stopped talking on a Tuesday. Not entirely. He still answered direct questions. Yes, no, I'm fine, I'm not hungry. The minimal vocabulary of a child who has decided that words are more trouble than they're worth. But the other kind of talking, the kind that happened at dinner when he used to narrate his entire day in the unpunctuated stream of consciousness that had sometimes exhausted her and now, in its absence, felt like a missing frequency she hadn't known she was tuned to, that stopped. She noticed on day 3. She cataloged it on day 5. By day 8, she had scheduled an appointment with Dr. Reyes, who was the best child psychologist in the city, and whose wait list was 4 months long, but who had agreed to see Liam immediately because Era had funded the new wing of the hospital where he held his practice, and he owed her a phone call at minimum. Dr. Reyes was thorough. He was also expensive, well-credentialed, and completely certain of his framework. Classic acute stress response, he told her, in the small beige office that smelled like diffused lavender and professional competence. Very common in children after near-miss events. The brain processes the fear on a delay. What you're seeing, the withdrawal, the disrupted sleep, the hypervigilance in public spaces, these are textbook presentations. We'll do 6 to 8 sessions of trauma-focused CBT. I'd expect meaningful improvement within a month. Ara had nodded and taken the intake forms and scheduled the first session for the following Monday. Liam sat through it in complete silence. He sat through the second session the same way. After the third session, Dr. Reyes pulled her aside and said, with the careful confidence of a man recalibrating, that some children required a longer runway before they felt safe enough to engage in the therapeutic process. He's waiting for something, Dr. Reyes said. I can't yet determine what. Ara drove home and sat in the parking garage for 9 minutes before going upstairs. She had not stopped the project. She had asked Marcus to pull the suppressed valuation data. He had, and the numbers were exactly as uncomfortable as she'd expected. And she had asked legal to review the timeline flexibility, and legal had come back with a 12-page memo that said, in essence, technically possible but financially inadvisable. And she had read all 12 pages and then set them aside and done what she always did when a decision was difficult. She had waited for the math to become undeniable. The board presentation was in 3 weeks. The groundbreak permit expired in 6. Phase 2 was contingent on Phase 1 clearing. $340 million did not renegotiate itself because one tenant had organized his arguments into neat, tabbed folders. She signed the clearance order on a Wednesday afternoon. Standard process. It went to legal, then to the city office, then to the residence by certified mail. She told herself she had done everything reasonable. She told herself 42 buyout packages at market plus 15 was, in fact, a decent offer by industry standard. She told herself a CEO who couldn't close phase one wasn't going to be a CEO much longer, and then where would the 1,200 jobs be? She told herself all of it. She didn't sleep well that night, but she'd been sleeping poorly for weeks, so she attributed it to Liam. She saw him again by accident. She had arrived early to pick Liam up from school, a small deliberate change in her schedule, one of several she'd made since the hospital, though she hadn't examined them too closely. She was standing near the east gate, the one with the scorch marks on the pavement that the maintenance crew hadn't fully buffed out yet, when she saw the girl first. Pigtails, maybe 5 or 6 years old. A backpack shaped like a dinosaur. She came through the gate at a small sprint and launched herself at the man waiting at the bottom of the steps with the uncalculated physical confidence of a child who has never once doubted she would be caught. He caught her. Of course he did. He swung her up, said something close to her ear that made her laugh, and set her down and took her hand. And that was when Ara recognized the jacket. Gray, dot, slightly worn at the left cuff. She had held that jacket in her hands in a hospital room. She had folded it and asked the nurse if she could keep it, just in case. She had told herself it was because Liam might want to return it. She had not examined that too closely either. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. "Excuse me." He turned. And for a moment, just a moment, something moved across his face that she couldn't name. Recognition, maybe, or something older than that. Then it settled back into the same quality of stillness she remembered from her office. Present, taut, territy. Measured. Not unfriendly, but not offering anything either. "Miss Ara," he said. "You know who I am. I recognized you from the company press coverage. When I was researching the buyout offer, I looked up everyone with signing authority on the project." A pause. "And when I sat with Liam on the curb," he said his mother's name, "I put it together later." Another pause, quieter. "He used to talk about you." The girl was looking up at Ara with the frank, unguarded curiosity of a child who hasn't yet learned that staring is rude. "This is my daughter Mia," he said. "Mia, say hello." "Hello," said Mia, without taking her eyes off Ara's heels. Ara crouched down, heels and blazer and all, to the girl's level. "Nice dinosaur," she said. Mia looked deeply pleased. "His name is Gerald." Ara stood. "Not as though, only he." She looked at Daniel Cho. She thought about the folder with the tabs. She thought about 12 pages of legal memo. She thought about the jacket on the hospital chair. "It was you," she said. "At the East Gate, the day of the accident." He didn't confirm or deny. He was watching her in the way she had noticed before, not wary exactly. More like a person who has learned to wait and see which version of a conversation they're actually in. "You saved my son," she said. "He was in the road," Daniel said simply. "I was right there." "That's not..." She stopped. Started again. "I've been trying to find out who it was. For 3 weeks. Liam asked me to find you." Something shifted in his expression. Not softened, that wasn't quite right. More like a door that had been most of the way shut, moved a degree or two toward open. "How is he?" he asked. And it was the way he asked it, carefully, like the answer genuinely mattered, that made her chest do something she wasn't prepared for. "He's struggling," she said. "Psychologically, he's not..." She pressed her lips together. "He's not talking much. The doctors say it's a stress response. They're working on it." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Does he have nightmares?" She blinked. "Yes. How did you... Does he flinch at loud sounds? Construction trucks? He asked me to change the route I drive to school. Daniel nodded slowly, like she was confirming something he'd already suspected. When I found him after, it wasn't just shock. He was completely still, not frozen scared still. Disconnected still. Like he'd gone somewhere inside himself to be safe. He glanced down at Mia, who had found a beetle on the pavement and was conducting a close scientific examination. I've seen it before. Not in children usually, but it's a specific kind of response. The CBT approach they're probably using works eventually, but it needs a back door. Something familiar. Safe. Not a therapist's office. What does it need? He met her eyes. Someone he trusts to just be present, not fixing it, not processing it. Just there, doing ordinary things. There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable so much as weighted. She thought about Liam on the couch last Sunday while she'd had her laptop open across from him, technically present, technically fulfilling the promise of no phone calls after 9. Technically. I'd like to thank you properly, she said. I'd like to do something. You don't have to. Mr. Cho. I didn't do it for you. He said it without edge. Flat and factual, the way you'd state the weather. I did it for him. There's no debt. He's a good kid. He picked up Mia's hand. We should go. Wait. She didn't reach out. She wasn't someone who reached out, but her voice stopped him. Please, He looked at her. She had spoken in boardrooms for 15 years. She had navigated acquisitions and hostile negotiations, and a divorce that had required 3 rounds of mediation. She was not a person who lost her words. I'm glad he's all right, Daniel said quietly. Not as a closing line. As something true. He walked away. Mia turned back once to wave, her dinosaur backpack bouncing. Era stood at the east gate for a long time. Liam appeared at her elbow 6 minutes later, backpack on, looking faintly suspicious at finding her here and not in the car. Mom? Why do you look weird? I don't look weird. You kind of look weird. She took his hand, he allowed it, barely, and they walked toward the car. She thought about what Daniel had said. Familiar, dart, turtle-key. Safe to an hole. Ordinary things. Liam dot tie. Liam. She unlocked the car, but didn't get in. That man who saved you, do you remember anything about him? Liam was quiet. Then he talked to me, after. His voice was careful. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just sat next to me on the curb and he said I did the right thing by staying still, that I didn't make it worse. A pause. Everyone else was shouting. He sounds like a good person, she said. Liam looked at her sideways. She had trained him to look for the asterisk. Do you know who he is? She thought about the folder with the tabs. She thought about certified mail and legal memos and ground break permits. Yes, she said. Liam looked at her with something she didn't see often on his face anymore. Something that was the opposite of the careful flatness he'd been wearing for 3 weeks. Something that looked, against all current evidence, like hope. Can we say thank you to him? Yes, she said again. Quieter, She drove home. She made dinner, actual dinner, pasta, from a recipe she'd had to look up because she hadn't cooked it in 2 years. She sat across from Liam at the table, no laptop, no phone face up, and she told him about Gerald the dinosaur backpack, and for the first time in 18 days her son laughed. Just once. Small, but real. That night, after Liam was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She wasn't drinking, and thought about all the things she knew. She knew that Daniel Cho had saved her son's life. She knew that he had recognized, in 3 minutes outside a school gate, what 3 sessions of professional therapy had not. That Liam needed presence, not process. She knew that his folder had been right about the suppressed valuation. She knew that his question about the demolition timeline had been the correct question. She knew that he had asked to have a conversation and she had given him one and then gone back to her office and signed the order anyway, and that the certified letters had gone out 4 days ago, and that Daniel Cho had by now received his. She sat with all of that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. She opened her email. She typed, "Marcus, I need to discuss the Maple Row timeline. I want to look at a 60-day extension on the vacate date. Can you get me a revised permit analysis by Friday?" She sent it before she could revise it into something more defensible. It was not an apology. It was not enough. She knew that. But it was the second time she had done something because it felt wrong not to, and this time she knew exactly whose face she was thinking of when she did it. The file on her desk had said, Daniel Cho, Unit 14. 7 years in residence. Single father, 1 child. It had not said, the man who ran toward the thing everyone else was running from. It had not said, the man who knew what her son needed before she did. It had not said, the man you are in the process of making homeless. Phyllis never said the things that mattered. She had built her entire career on that fact, and only now was beginning to understand what it had cost her. The letter was on the kitchen table when she got home. Not her letter, not the certified notice from the city office which she already knew had been delivered. This one was handwritten, on a piece of notepaper that had been folded once and left unsealed, as if whoever wrote it hadn't wanted to make it feel more permanent than it needed to be. She saw it because Liam had put it there. He was sitting at the table, still in his school uniform, watching her find it. She looked at him first. "Where did you get this?" "His daughter gave it to me." Liam's voice was careful in the way it had been careful for weeks, each word placed like a foot on uncertain ground. "She said her dad wanted you to have it. She said they were moving this weekend." Ara picked up the letter. "Miss Ara, I received the clearance notice. I understand the decision. I want you to know that I don't hold it against you. You told me when we met that you couldn't commit to anything that day, and you didn't. That was honest. I respect it. I found a place for Mia and me in Eastfield. It's further from her school, but we'll manage the commute. She's resilient. Kids usually are when you give them enough of the ordinary things. I hope Liam gets better. I mean that. He's a good kid. He has more going on inside him than he's been allowed to show. That's not a criticism, just something I noticed. He might just need time. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just didn't want to leave without saying, you asked the right questions. After I left your office, I thought about that. You pulled the valuation data. You asked Marcus about the timeline. Most people in your position wouldn't have done either of those things. They wouldn't have needed to because the math already worked. That matters, even if it didn't change the outcome. I think it matters to you too, or you wouldn't have done it. Take care of your son. D. Cho. She read it twice. Then she folded it exactly the way it had been folded and set it down. Liam was still watching her. Mom, he said. I know. He's the one who... I know, Liam. You signed the thing anyway. It was not an accusation. That was almost worse. It was just a fact. delivered with the flat precision of a child who has recently learned that the world does not always arrange itself around what is right. You knew it was him and you signed it anyway. She opened her mouth. She had an answer ready. She always had an answer ready. It was practically a physical reflex. About timelines and board obligations, and the complexity of decisions made at scale, and how one variable could not override the entire architecture of an 11-month project. She had given versions of this answer to journalists, to city council members, to herself, at 2 a.m, in kitchens exactly like this one. She looked at her son. She closed her mouth. "Yes," she said, "I did." The silence that followed was the most expensive thing she had ever sat inside. Then Liam pushed back his chair, walked past her to the hallway, and went upstairs without saying anything else. She heard his door close. Not slammed. That would have been easier. Just closed with the quiet, deliberate click of a child who has decided to stop expecting something. Arash stood at the kitchen table for a long time. Long enough for the light to change. Long enough for the tea she'd made earlier to go completely cold. She was a person who solved problems. She had solved problems for 15 years, systematically, rationally, with full information and appropriate margins. She had built a company from 40 employees to 400. She had restructured acquisitions that other firms had walked away from. She had sat across from people twice her age and 3 times as aggressive and not flinched once. She could not solve this. She could not draft a memo that addressed the precise frequency at which her son's door had just clicked shut. She could not run the numbers on what it meant that he had stopped looking at her with hope. She could not build a model that projected the trajectory of a relationship between a mother and a child where the child had learned, at 8 years old, to search every sentence for the asterisk. Tonight. She picked up her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was still at the office, which meant it was not yet 10 p.m. She had trained him well. "The Maple Row clearance," she said. "I need to stop it." A pause. "I got your email about the 60-day extension. I was going to call you in the morning. Legal says it's workable, but the board is going to push back. Hard dat I. It's not enough," she said. "The extension buys time. I need to stop the clearance entirely. Pull the groundbreak permit application. Site environmental review. The drainage assessment from March had 2 pages of caveats that legal soft-pedaled. Use those. Ara de me. That's not a delay, that's a full reset. The board presentation is in. Reschedule it. The Phase 2 contractors are on." Marcus. She said his name in the tone that meant the conversation about whether this is a good idea is over. The conversation is now about how we do it. Pull the permit. I'll handle the board. Another pause. Shorter this time. He knew her well enough to know when the variable had changed. "I'll have the paperwork to the city office by tomorrow afternoon," he said. "Tonight." "Tonight," he agreed. She hung up. She stood there. The board presentation would have to be rescheduled. The Phase 2 contractors would bill for the stoppage. Penalty clauses alone would run 2, maybe 3 million. The environmental review would take 3 months minimum. After that, another 6 to rebuild the project design from the ground up. The 340 million was still there, in principle, at the end of a longer road. She had made decisions this expensive before. She had never made one that felt this cheap. The permit would be pulled. The clearance would be suspended. It was the right thing to do. She knew it was the right thing to do, and the fact that she had known it for weeks and not done it was a problem she would have to carry for longer than tonight. But it was too late for Daniel Cho. She knew that too. She found his new address through the Tenants Association. A woman named Gloria, who had been coordinating the Maple Row responses and who answered her call at 9:30 p.m. with the barely concealed wariness of someone who had been on the receiving end of certified mail. Ara gave her no explanation. She asked for the address. After a long silence, Gloria gave it to her. Eastfield, down here in Eastfield, see you. A 40-minute drive at this hour, longer in traffic. She went. Eastfield, D. Eastfield. A 40-minute drive at this hour, longer in traffic. Before she left, she went to Liam's room. He was already asleep. She took the gray jacket from the chair in the corner where it had been sitting for 3 weeks. Folded the way she'd folded it in the hospital, slightly worn at the left cuff. She draped it over her arm. She told herself it was because it belonged to him, and she was returning it. She didn't examine that too closely. She went. She had not thought through what she was going to say. This was unusual for her. She generally prepared, outlined, anticipated counter-arguments. She had given eulogies with less preparation than she typically brought to difficult conversations. But tonight she drove with no plan and no talking points, in heels she hadn't taken off, with Daniel's letter on the passenger seat. The building in Eastfield was smaller than Maple Row, newer, in the way that new buildings in cities like this were sometimes new, recently renovated, which meant different floors and different rooms, and a lobby that smelled like fresh paint over something older. She buzzed, Unit 6, Troy. She waited. Who is it? His voice through the intercom was flat, not unfriendly. Just the voice of someone who had been packing boxes for 3 days. Ara, got a train. Silence. I'm not here to negotiate, she said, to the intercom. I'm not offering you anything. I don't have a check or a counteroffer or a revised timeline. She paused. I need to say something to you. I can do it here if you'd rather not buzz me up. I'm fine either way. A long pause. Then the door clicked open. He had been packing, which she had expected. The living room was half dismantled, boxes stacked against one wall, the larger furniture still in place, a child's drawing still taped to the wall in one corner, as if he had not yet decided whether to take them or leave them. Nia was asleep. He had told her this when he opened the door, the way parents state the important logistics up front before anything else. She held out the jacket without saying anything. Gray, why did you say? Gray, slightly worn at the left cuff. He looked at it for a moment. Then he took it. He didn't say anything either. He just folded it over the back of the nearest chair, carefully, the same way she had. And that small, wordless act settled something in the room that she hadn't known was unsettled. I pulled the permit, Ara said. He looked at her. What? The ground break permit. I cited the drainage assessment. The March report had sufficient ambiguity to trigger a mandatory environmental review. It'll buy 6 to 8 months. Long enough to redesign Phase 2. She kept her voice level. The Maple Row clearance is suspended. He was quiet for a moment. She couldn't read his expression. That's 42 families, yes. He looked around the half-packed room. At the boxes. At the bare wall where Mia's drawings had been. The families who haven't moved yet, they can stay? The clearance is fully suspended. Anyone still in residence is protected until the redesign is complete. And the ones who already left. It wasn't a question. She answered it like one anyway. There will be right of return provisions in the new framework. Priority placement in the redesigned units at pre-suppression rent values. She held his gaze. I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure leaving wasn't the only option. A long silence. He looked at the boxes again. At the jacket on the chair. Why? She had prepared for this question and then abandoned the preparation, and now she was standing in a half-packed apartment at 10 in the evening with no answer except the true one. Because it was wrong, she said. It was defensible. The math worked. The legal exposure was managed. But it was wrong. And I knew it was wrong. And I signed it anyway because I had spent 11 months on that project, and I didn't want to be the person who lost it. She paused. That's the honest answer. There isn't a better one. Daniel sat down on the arm of the couch. She stayed standing. Liam's door closed tonight, she said. Quietly. That's the part that... She stopped. Pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose and held them there for a moment. I run a company. I know how to do that. I know how to read a room and close a deal and retain talent and manage a board and make the decisions that need making. I know how to do all of it. She lowered her hand. I don't know how to be his mother. I don't know how to be present in the way that actually counts. I've been in the room. I've kept the promises I made. No phone calls after 9. Dinner on the table. Early pickup from school. And somehow, her voice did something she didn't fully control. He still learned to look for the asterisk. The apartment was very quiet. He talked to me about you, she said. After we saw you at the gate. He said you sat with him on the curb and you didn't make a big deal out of it. You said he'd done the right thing. She exhaled. I have been his mother for 8 years and I didn't know how to do that. You did it in 5 minutes. Daniel said, I wasn't trying to. I know you weren't. She looked at him. That's what I'm saying. He was quiet for a long time. Behind him, through the doorway, she could see the hallway to the bedrooms. A nightlight, soft orange, casting a small warm circle on the floor. The kind of ordinary thing a child fell asleep to. I'm not going to be able to undo the disruption to your daughter, Ara said. The move happened. That's real. I can make it easier. Financially, logistically. But I can't pretend it didn't happen, and I'm not here to try. She took a breath. I'm here because my son asked me to say thank you, and I did a very bad job of it. And because... She stopped again. Because you wrote that I asked the right questions. And I think that was you being generous. I think what actually happened was that you asked the right questions. And I heard them. And went back. And signed the order anyway. She met his eyes. I wanted you to know that I know that. Daniel looked at her for a long time. Then he said, sit down. She sat. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 mugs of tea. She hadn't asked for any, and she noticed that he hadn't asked if she wanted it either. He had simply made it, the way people do for other people in moments that have become too large to cross, without some small, ordinary gesture to anchor them. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Mia cried when we packed her drawings, he said. Not for long, she's practical, like her mother was. He looked at his own mug. But she cried. Era Zaid, nothing. There was nothing to say to that. I'm not angry at you, he said. I want to be clear about that. I was, for longer than I'd like to admit, after the letter came. Some days I still am. When Mia asked why her new room smells different. When she said she doesn't want to take a different route to school. He looked at the boxes on the floor. It's a specific kind of tired moving a child somewhere she didn't choose to go. He was quiet for a moment. But I've spent a lot of years learning the difference between being angry at a person and being angry at a system. It's usually the second one. He looked up. You are inside a system that made the decision you made feel like the only sensible one. That's not an excuse. But it's a reason. A pause. Doesn't mean it didn't cost us something. I could have changed it sooner, she said. Yes, he agreed, without cruelty. You could have. They sat with that. The project redesign, she said eventually. I want to do it differently. Mixed use, community percentage, tenure protections for long-term residents. It'll take longer and the margin shrinks, but it works. I've run the numbers on similar frameworks. It's not charity. It's just a longer horizon. She paused. I'd wanted to talk to the Tenants Association. Properly. Not as a PR exercise. As... She looked for the word. As people who live there. Gloria will have opinions, he said. There was a faint edge of something that might eventually become dry humor. She always does. I assumed. She's usually right. I assumed that too. He looked at her. Something in his expression had shifted across the course of the conversation. Not warmer, exactly, but less guarded. Like a window that had been painted shut for so long that opening it required a degree of intention. Liam's going to be okay, he said. In case that's what's keeping you up. How do you know? Because he's angry at you. He said it simply. Kids who've gone completely quiet aren't angry. They've just left. He hasn't left. His door closed quietly, which means he still expects you to knock on it. He picked up his mug. That's worth something. Ara looked down at her tea. She was not a person who cried in front of other people. She was not crying now. But there was a pressure behind her sternum that she recognized as something she had not let herself feel in a very long time. The particular weight of being seen accurately, without defense, by someone who had decided to tell her the truth anyway. Why? She asked. He looked at her. Why are you being... She gestured imprecisely. You could be furious with me. You have grounds. Why are you telling me my son's going to be okay? He thought about it. Genuinely, it seemed. Because Mia asked about him this afternoon. She wanted to know if Liam knew where Gerald the dinosaur went on weekends. He paused. I told her I'd find out. Ara looked at him. Something very close to a laugh moved through her. Not quite, not yet, but the shape of one. The possibility of one. The sense that two people sitting in a half-packed apartment over lukewarm tea might be, improbably, at the beginning of something rather than the end. Gerald, she said, apparently has strong feelings about construction sites. Daniel looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. And then, slowly, quietly, he smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the kind of smile you gave to something that had surprised you into it, against the circumstances, against the reasonable expectation, against everything except the fact of the moment itself. I'll put the drawings back up, he said. Tomorrow. Tor. She nodded. She finished her tea. She said, good night. She drove home through a city full of buildings she had made, and people who lived inside them, and the specific darkness of a Thursday at 11 p.m., which looked, if you paid attention, exactly like the darkness of any other night. Except that it wasn't, and she knew it wasn't, and for once she did not look away. She knocked on Liam's door. After a moment, she heard him shift in his bed. Mom? Yeah. She leaned her forehead against the door. Can I come in? A pause. Then, yeah. She went in. She sat on the edge of his bed. She did not have a plan, or an outline, or a strategy. She just sat there, in the dark, while her son breathed beside her, and the nightlight in the hallway made a small warm circle on the floor, and somewhere in Eastfield, a little girl with pigtails was asleep under drawings that were going back up tomorrow. She stayed until he fell asleep. She didn't move for a long time after that. The things she had built would outlast her: the buildings, the skylines, the 1,200 jobs, and the 340 million and the name on the developments that would still be standing when she was gone. She had always known that. She had not known until recently that outlasting was not the same as mattering. She was beginning to understand the difference. It turned out the arithmetic of progress had always had a variable she'd been leaving out. She was adding it back in.